It's been 25 years since Billie-Jo Jenkins was brutally murdered in her own back garden while painting the patio doors to earn extra pocket money. She was only 13 years old. Her stepfather, Sean Jenkins, was arrested and ultimately convicted of her murder. However, 2 subsequent retrials resulted in his conviction being deemed unsafe and he walked free. To this day, no one has been found accountable for her death. In this video, I'll review the evidence and tell the story. It's a sad and complicated case. I'm going to finish this video with a visit to Billie-Jo's final resting place in Newham, just outside London. Billie-Jo Jenkins was born on the 29th of March 1983 in East London. She didn't have a great start in life. Her father was in prison and her mum struggled to cope. Billie-Jo found herself in the care system. From the age of 9 up until her death, she was fostered by the Jenkins family. The fact that they have the same surname is purely coincidental, as they weren't related. Her foster family consisted of her foster parents, Sean and Lois Jenkins, and their own 4 biological children. They moved to Hastings on the East Sussex coast, and Billie-Jo went to Helenswood School, where she was described as fun-loving, with an ambition to become an actor. On February the 15th, 1997, Billie-Jo Jenkins was alone. The rest of the family were out while she earned some extra pocket money by painting the patio doors at the back of the house. Her foster father, Sean Jenkins, had been both the last to see her alive and the first on the scene of the murder, being the one to call the emergency services. According to reports, he had argued with Billie-Jo about her loud music and had then gone to a DIY store with his 2 eldest daughters. His daughters were said to have been in the car at the time of the argument. On returning from the store, Sean had found Billie-Jo dying in a pool of blood. Sean Jenkins was away from the house for a matter of about 10 minutes, and in this time, Billie-Jo was attacked. Billie-Jo had been bludgeoned by an iron tent peg, struck at least 5 times in the head. Sean and Lois Jenkins made a public appeal to catch their foster daughter's killer. Sean claimed he had been very concerned about prowlers and had recently fitted security cameras on the property. 9 days after the murder, Sean Jenkins was arrested. He was charged with the murder of Billie-Jo on March the 14th, a month after her death. Police found his story implausible, that he was the last to see her alive and she was subsequently attacked and murdered in the short window of time that he had visited the DIY store. Forensic examination of his clothing found 148 invisible specks of blood, said to be consistent with blood spatter from the blows that killed Billie-Jo. There would be 3 trials in this case, the first one beginning in June 1998 and lasting for a month. Jenkins' defence team claimed that the microscopic blood spatter on his fleece jacket and trousers came from Billie-Jo's final breaths as he tended to her as she lay dying. Jenkins' defence team purported that Billie-Jo was killed by a prowler, and a mentally ill man had recently been seen in the area and was considered a suspect. The prosecution asserted that the blood spatter was consistent with the fine mist expected when a blunt object is forcefully struck against an already bloody surface. They argued that such were the devastating nature of her injuries, Billie-Jo would have lacked the strength to make breaths forceful enough to make such a blood transfer. Jenkins' own 999 call had had him state that Billie-Jo wasn't breathing. Further accusations against Jenkins included him being a violent man with a quick temper who had beaten both his wife and Billie-Jo in the past. It also transpired that Jenkins had lied about his qualifications and where he had studied in order to gain his deputy head teacher position at William Parker Boys' School in Hastings. At the time of the murder, he had just been appointed head teacher. All this through fraudulent means. It painted a picture of a dishonest and scheming man. There was only Jenkins' word for it that he had left his daughters alive after his brief stop at the house before going to the DIY shop. Sean Jenkins was convicted of Billie-Jo's murder on July the 2nd, 1998 and sentenced to life imprisonment. He was to serve 6 years in prison before getting out on appeal. There were 2 trials and Sean Jenkins was eventually acquitted because the jury could not reach a verdict. This did not pronounce an undisputable verdict of not guilty for Jenkins, but he was a free man. The defence's main arguments in Jenkins' first retrial were focused on the all-important blood spatter. Forensic scientists stated it was possible that microscopic blood spray could have been released from Billie-Jo's airways as he moved her. The jury deliberated for 39 hours but couldn't come to a verdict. At the second retrial, the focus was again on the blood spatter. At this trial, it was also suggested that Jenkins had an inappropriate and flirtatious relationship with Billie-Jo. The second retrial was still unable to decide either way if the blood transfer onto Jenkins' clothes occurred due to an attack or because the body had been moved on discovery. Much controversy still exists, and there are definite camps when it comes to Sean Jenkins. There are many that consider he got away with murder, and others that believe he has been wrongly accused and remains a victim of an initial miscarriage of justice. Some of the challenging points include the following. Crucial new forensic evidence was not allowed to be heard at the second retrial due to it being submitted without enough time for the defence to consider it. This new evidence purportedly claimed that the spray of blood on Jenkins' clothing also contained some bone fragments. This would be consistent with him being the one to deliver the blows. Other evidence called into question the mentally ill man who had been spotted nearby acting strangely. He had initially been eliminated due to having an alibi. However, some holes were found in his alibi, but crucially, Billie-Jo had been found with part of a plastic bag bizarrely inserted into her nose. It was found that this particular individual, who has always remained unnamed, had a tendency to push plastic bags into his mouth and nose. This very strange and inexplicable coincidence cast further doubt on Jenkins' guilt. It also emerged that Jenkins' wife Lois may have influenced the children in their statements, with them later changing them. They stated that they weren't in the car when Jenkins popped into the house, but they'd actually followed him inside, and that they saw for themselves that Billie-Jo was unhurt by their father. The children also stated that the gate that was shut when they left was open when they came back, which would point to someone else accessing the garden while they were out at the DIY store with their dad. Much has been said about the trip to the DIY store, which only took 10 minutes because Jenkins turned around again and came back home saying he'd forgotten his wallet. The prosecution assert that he had killed Billie-Jo already when he briefly popped in, and the aborted trip to the DIY store was a ruse to establish an alibi. The police felt that a stranger coming in for exactly 10 minutes to kill Billie-Jo and flee was implausible. In Jenkins' defence, his popping in for 3 minutes, killing Billie-Jo, then jumping back into the car with his daughters is equally as unbelievable. The daughters changing their story, if true, would mean that he couldn't have done it. Jenkins did try to appeal for compensation for the 6 years he spent in prison. He was looking to have £500,000. His claim was dismissed, as technically he couldn't prove that he was innocent. Billie-Jo was laid to rest at the London Cemetery and Crematorium in April 1997. Her white coffin was carried in a horse-drawn carriage and followed by almost 300 mourners. Many had made the journey from Hastings to East London for the service. Billie-Jo's natural mother stormed out of the chapel just as the service was about to start because Lois Jenkins arrived with her daughters. Feeling unable to stay away, even knowing that she wasn't welcome. Sean Jenkins, having been charged with her murder and out on bail, made no attempt to come. Billie-Jo's mum missed the service and the burial of her daughter. So here we are at the final resting place of Billie-Jo Jenkins. Real quiet corner of this really beautiful old cemetery. Just stumbled upon it, been walking around for a little bit, wondering if I was ever going to find it. And here it is. I saw the name out the corner of my eye. Yeah. In loving memory of a dear sister, Billie-Jo Jenkins, 1983 to 1987. forever in our hearts. Also, William Jenkins' dad, 1952 to 2006, we love him dearly. There's a little pot here. It says Billie-Jo, love Auntie Marge. Miss you, sister. Forever remembered, forever missed. Looks like some flowers been put here reasonably recently. Lots of little angels. Oh, that's so sad. Billie-Jo Jenkins. Really, really quiet, peaceful corner. Just 13 years old. Still nobody held accountable. Final resting place. Rest in peace. This brings me to the end of this video, and what has been quite a journey this week. I remember this case, as many do, and it has always stayed with me. Such a pretty young girl with her life ahead of her, brutally ended for no reason anyone has been able to establish, and no justice 25 years on. There have been other claims over the years. In 2012, the Daily Mirror linked the case to the M25 rapist. No charges have been made though. The police state that they review evidence and DNA every 2 years, which is their practice. There's so much heartache surrounding this case, so many fingers pointed and questions unanswered. As I stand here at her grave, I feel quite emotional. It's a lovely day in this peaceful and beautiful place, but it's no place for a 13-year-old girl. No place to be when, without the evil that snatched away her life, she could be absolutely anything now. In her 30s, with a family of her own maybe, on our TV screens or on a stage fulfilling her acting dream. She could have been anything. She could have been alive. My wish for her and all who loved her is that one day justice will be done.